Here we go.
Excellent.
Well, I am so glad that you were able to make it tonight, Lisa.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk to you.
It's been forever since we've actually talked in person, so that'll be really cool. I'm just going to introduce everything, and then I'll have you introduce yourself.
Well, I am so glad that you were able to make it tonight, Lisa.
Thank you.
What is going on?
I don't know,
It's
but
been
I'm hearing
forever since we've actually talked in person. So
Hold on. I think the live stream is on another.
I'm just going to introduce everything.
Hold on.
And then
Hold on, because I was linking people to
I
it.
am so glad that you were able to make it tonight, Lisa. Thank you.
What is going on?
I don't know, but I'm hearing
Ever since we've actually talked in
Hold on.
person.
There we are.
So, hold on. I think the live.
Sorry, I knew I needed to turn something off. Okay, that was embarrassing. Sorry, everyone. And by the way, before we get started, I just wanted to let you all know who are watching on the YouTube live stream that we can see your comments, and I'll be watching them throughout in case you have any questions throughout, and I'll share those with Lisa as the chat goes on. But I just want to introduce myself first. I am Stacy Whitman. I am the founder and former publisher of 2 books, an imprint of Lee and Low. It feels really weird to say former. I'm now an editor at large, and I'm also the owner of the Curious Cat Bookshop, which is where we're coming to you from, the Curious Cat Bookshop podcast. In person, we're at 386 Main Street in Winstead, Connecticut. That's up in the northwest corner of Connecticut. So if you're local, we'd love to see you. If you are local, I'm just going to do a quick rundown of things that we have coming up. Tomorrow night, we have a puzzle night because January is National Puzzle Month. Next week, we have Beth Rebus right here on this YouTube channel as well. So if you love science fiction and fantasy, if you love Star Wars, and if you love young adult books, that's what we're going to be talking about with Beth Rebus. And if you need a link to it, go to curiouscatbookshop.com/events and scroll down and you'll find the link there. We have story time every Friday morning at 11. Next Wednesday night, we're going to have a new thing. We're going to start a writing group here in person at the store. We've got book clubs. This month, we have our first official meeting of our kids book club, which we're reading the one and only Ivan for. And for adults, we have our Read the Rainbow book club, which is the 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo this month, and Assistant to the Villain for our other book club. And we do a silent book club the last Wednesday of the month. And if you are interested in our book clubs, we've also got a lot going on for the next couple of months. I'm going to be having those put up on the website this weekend, so keep an eye out for what we've got coming up. And so while many of you are not local to us, we do ask that if you love this conversation tonight and want to buy the book, please order it from us. You can order online at curiouscatbookshop.com for home delivery, and you can pick it up in store if you want, if you're local. Okay, so speaking of the book,
I have my
the whole reason we're here. And Lisa is a little bit blurry. I think we've got connection issues, but we should be able to hear her. I'm so happy to welcome my friend Lisa Mangum to the podcast. We've known each other forever, it feels like. Not in college, I don't think, because we went to different colleges. I was at BYU. I didn't leave BYU until 2001 because I took the long way around. And so I think what was that?
I went to the University of Utah, so we were at different colleges.
Yeah, and then you started at Deseret Book while I was still in college because, like I said, I took the long way around. And I think we must have met like at an LTUE, which was Life, the Universe, and Everything. For those who don't know, it's a conference in Utah. I'm guessing because I don't know. It's been long enough that I don't even remember how we met, but we've been colleagues for a long time on parallel trajectories, and you've been at Shadow Mountain and I've been everywhere. But you're also a writer. And so
Yes.
We're coming at this from 2 different perspectives when we're talking about your writing goals. And so you can come at this from giving advice as a writer, and you can also give advice as an editor. So introduce yourself and the book. Let us know how you got started in writing, how you got started in editing, and why you wrote this book, and so forth.
Yeah. Well, like I mentioned, I went to the University of Utah for college, and I went determined to get a degree in English and to be a book editor. It is what I had always wanted to be. And I did it in part because my mom was an editor. She was a magazine editor for most of her career. And so I knew that was a thing people did. I knew that was a job people could do. And it turned out I had a knack for it. And Mom and I would always talk about the editing margin and how to develop an idea, storytelling. And she was my first teacher and mentor when it came to creative writing. And we had such a great relationship, my mom and I wanted to do what she did. And so I wanted to be a book editor. So after college, I applied at Deseret Book and was one of their freelance proofreaders for a summer. And then I was hired at Bookcraft as their editorial assistant in 1997. And then Deseret Book acquired Bookcraft in 1999. So then I was back under that umbrella, and I've been there ever since. And I worked my way up, and now I'm a managing editor for Shadow Mountain, which is the national market imprint for the Deseret Book Company.
And if anybody doesn't know what an imprint is, that's an imprint.
Yeah. The publisher name on the spine. And so what that means as managing editor is that I'm involved in acquisitions. So I review submissions that come in and decide which ones are worthy to pass on and possibly publish, and which ones sadly get a rejection letter. And then I also do developmental editing with authors. I do line edits and copy edits. I go to meetings to talk about titles and covers, and then check all the corrections and get the books ready for press. And I work on 12 to 14 titles at any given time, because we work on multiple years at the same time. So there's
I
always
never know what year it is.
I know. Especially this time of year where I'm like, is it 24, is it 25, or is it 26?
Maybe even possibly 27.
I just sent an email to an author yesterday because her book is coming out in 2027, and we were talking scheduling. So yeah, I don't know what time it is, but because I've been in the business so long, I also loved storytelling. So I wrote some novels in addition to being an editor. I wrote the Hourglass Door trilogy in 2009, 2010, 2011. And then I wrote After Hello in 2012. And they were all published by Shadow Mountain, which was really fun. So I do come from this topic both as a writer and as an editor. And it's partly why I wanted to write this book and take all the things that I have learned from 25 plus years about being a storyteller and being a creative person and being an editor, and seeing how publishing has evolved and changed over the years. It's very different now than when I started, and really tried to condense it down into an easy, conversational, helpful book. Write fearless, edit smart, get published. So that,
and it's also nice and short, so nobody has to be fearful about reading it.
Yeah, I tried to keep them really application driven. So like, here's something that you can actually do to help improve your manuscript right now. Here's something maybe that here's something you can think, the way to think about your work that maybe you haven't thought about before, and really tried to give practical examples throughout the book. One of the fun things that I did was I label them story time with Lisa, where I'll present a principle or a tip or a suggestion, and then I can tell a story about how I learned about it or how I used that in my own writing or in my own career as an example, because I think we learn best through story. It's why we love to read and why we love to write and why we love to tell each other our stories, because that's how we can.
Tabitha, I don't know if you can see her.
Oh, so cute. So cute.
It's definitely the Curious Cat Bookshop for a reason.
Leave it.
And I also have a foster kitty running around here somewhere who likes to walk on keyboards. So if I suddenly disappear, I'll be back as soon as I can. So yeah, I digging into this as an editor, I don't know that there's anything that is new to me, but it's a useful resource because it has so many places where if I get stuck on this, I can just reference it. But if I want to read it through, I can learn through story. So like it's doing both. So let's dig into the book. What does it mean to you to write fearless?
I think for me, it means not being afraid to play and not being afraid to write something that eventually you might have to throw out. Because I know that when I write creatively, when I have my author hat on and I'm trying to tell a story or write a story or create a character or develop a scene, I have this great fear that it has to be perfect when I put it down on paper. And that is not true. It can be messy and ugly and not make a lot of sense in that first drafting stage, because when you're very first approaching the story, it doesn't have to be perfect. That can all come later. And I have to remind myself of that all the time. And I think it also means to have the courage to say what's in your heart, to tell the story that you've always wanted to tell, or that you are thinking maybe you're not capable of it because it means being vulnerable, or because it means being brave in a way. I think that also is the other part of that writing fearless. We've all got a story inside of us that needs to be told or that we want to tell. And sometimes we just need to be brave enough to sit down at that blank page or that blank screen and just put something down, warts and all, and figure it out later to make it beautiful and ready to present.
I think that's a really great description of how it feels to sit there and stare at that blank page. Whether you're talking about writing fiction or nonfiction, I'm sure you've dealt with that, even just writing a book like this or whatever. My train of thought just kind of walked off in the middle of that sentence.
Well, whatever medium you are being creative in, I think it holds true whether you're doing art or painting or sculpture or music or even the sciences, which are also a different kind of creativity. Whatever it is that you're pouring yourself into, there's that moment where you have to cross the boundary of, this is where I feel safe sharing, to I'm going to lay this out for anybody and everybody to see and consume and participate in.
And possibly critique. You have to be willing.
And possibly not like or not understand. But I think the greater reward is crossing that boundary and connecting with the people for whom that story resonates. I think we all can pinpoint a book or an author or a moment or something that touched us, that changed us, that we have internalized and it made it a part of who we are. And the book that you're writing could be that book for somebody else.
Right. Exactly. And okay, so we're having this right now because we're talking about achieving your writing goals in the new year. And I'm not a New Year's resolution kind of person. I'm not even this is my word for the year kind of person. But New Year's is a time that many people, they pull out that pristine notebook that's too pretty to write in and they go, but what you were just talking about, the fear of the blank page, of messing it up, can make people freeze. And so what do you say to people when that happens, besides, be willing to be messy? I think another part of it might even be willing to let yourself not show it to somebody for a little while.
Yeah. I think it's actually really smart to not necessarily show it to somebody right away, because it's still in the creation stage. It's still in that messy playground stage. I think a lot of people at the beginning of the year, like you said, we sit down and we're like, new year, this is the year I'm going to write that book. This is the year I'm going to do it. And that is noble, and that is a great place to start. But I think it's really important when setting goals to be realistic about your time and your process. And so you could say, this is the year I'm going to write a book, and then plan for it to take the whole year. Don't say, this is the year I'm going to write a book, and assume you're going to have it done at the end of January, because it could take you the whole year to actually just even get that first draft down. And that's fine. It may take you longer than that. When you're looking at your schedule, when you're looking at your goals, when you're looking at your calendar, also take into account how much time you really have. When are your kids in school? Do you have family vacations coming up? Do you have more time to write at night than in the morning? Like, really look at your life and build writing into those times and spaces where you have it available. Because the worst thing I think you could do is say, I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to need to write 3,000 words every day for X amount of days. And then when you have a day where you just can't get those words down, it's so easy to beat yourself up over that. Say, well, now I've got to write 6,000 words tomorrow. And you feel like a failure, and you'll start doubting yourself and feeling like, well, maybe this isn't for me. So I think starting small and starting smart are ways to really get the momentum building in January, February, March, so that late as the year progresses, you have flexed those writing muscles, you've built them up, and to the point where maybe there are some days you could write 3,000 words or 5,000 words and really get in the groove.
Exactly. Whitney actually just commented, I recently looked up the etymology of resolution and was so pleasantly surprised to see that it originally comes from the Latin to loosen or relax. I thought that was really interesting.
That is interesting. I
'Cause
like that.
I think that kind of ties into what you were just talking about. Is it's not so much the way we use it now, I'm resolved, I'm going to go hard and go fast, but to allow yourself, like, let's go right into my next question, because this kind of ties into what you were just saying. You work full time, and yet you found the time to do a lot of things outside work. It's not just your writing. You go off to Disneyland every now and then, and you run or whatever. For me, as an editor, I've never really been able to separate out my creative brain with working with my writers versus my creative brain working on my own writing. I haven't written since I was laid off in 2008. Other than, just a blog post here and there. I do short form, I do social media. It's not the same thing, but also I'm starting a bookstore, blah, blah, blah. But I've been thinking about, because I've got this transition in my life where I'm only working 3 days a week, and I'm still going to be dedicated to my authors during that time, but I want to allow myself a little bit more time for my own creativity. Maybe one of these days I'll write something myself. But for that person who already has a full-time job, that person who has kids and a full-time job, I think that what you're saying is very important, because it's not so much that you have to somehow carve full-time writing out of a life. You need to carve 10 minutes, 15 minutes. If you can carve an hour, great. And one thing that you said in the book that I think was a really interesting thing, also was not write every day, but try to write every day. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that's actually what I was going to lead into, because I think one of the things that also makes it hard to shoulder the burden of a resolution, of a goal of writing a book, which is a big thing, is that we think the only thing that counts is the word count, the actual number of words you put on a page, or the actual number of words that stay on the page after you've edited them or deleted them or rewritten them. But in reality, everything counts when it comes to this. And so trying to write every day counts. There may be some days where in the middle of everything else that's going on, you only have 5 or 10 minutes to think through a problem. That's still working on your book. That still counts as working and writing your book, because it's such a mental activity that is long term. There may be days where you sit down and you can put thousands of words down, and that counts too. But phrasing it and reframing it in a way of like, I'm going to try to get something done on my book today. And then however big that bucket is of time that you have, you can pick and choose what it is and how you work on it. Today, I'm going to do character development, and I'm really going to get to know my antagonist, because right now he's just a wallpaper character in the background, and he needs to be more three-dimensional. So what can I do today in 15 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour to develop that character, bring him to life? That counts as part of your goal. When you're in the flow, if you sit down and say, okay, I'm going to try to write this scene, and I'm going to set a timer for 15 minutes, and I'm going to write stream of consciousness, no punctuation, no nothing, until it starts to click. And then you can feel when that story starts to pour out. And then great, that counts too. And I think going back to Whitney's comment about this idea of a resolution being a relaxation or a loosening, is giving yourself permission to be loose, to pivot, to dance a little bit, to just have fun with it. Writing and creativity should be fun. And
Why are you doing it otherwise?
yeah. And now that's not to say it's fun all the time. There are plenty of times in the process where you're like, I hate this.
It's absolutely work. Yeah.
It is hard, and I don't understand what I'm doing, and why did I decide to do this? But even the challenge can be fun in overcoming it, in figuring your way through a knotty problem, or suddenly getting that bolt of inspiration that says, oh my gosh, I know what has to happen next, because you've been thinking about it and working at it. That's why we're in it, for those moments.
Someone asked, how do you stay in the writing mindset so then when you're ready to go, when you have those brief 10 to 15 minutes of writing increments, that you don't spend that time gathering your thoughts?
That's a really good question. It's going to be a little bit different for everybody. I know for me, when I was writing book 2 of my trilogy, The Golden Spiral, that was a book that I had to write in 15, 20-minute increments. And I carved out the space when I was commuting to and from work on the train. It was about a 20, 25-minute ride. And I just had to train myself every day to sit down and only read the last paragraph, not everything that I had written before, but just the last paragraph, and then just go, and not worry too much that if the transition was seamless or not. I wanted it to be able to say, I can patch that a little bit later. I just kind of remember the next thing to do. One of the other things that I would do is I would sort of make a shopping list of what needed to happen in a particular chapter or in a particular scene. I'd be like, okay, I have a few minutes. I know in this chapter, these characters need to talk about this, this, and this. I need to make sure I hit this emotional beat, and they've got to, I've got to have at least one zinger in here. And so then every time I would open up that document, I would look at my shopping list and say, okay, what's the next little thing that I need to do in this moment? And I'd write that part. And then the next day I'd open it up and I'd sort of just write the next thing on my list. And I would try to build that list on a day, on a weekend, or a day when I would have time to say, let me think about this chapter.
Yeah, so you're planning ahead, but you're not necessarily, you're doing writing process stuff, but it's a plan as opposed to the actual writing in the moment. Which actually leads us right into the section that we're going to be talking about, writing process, as opposed to just being fearless. A number of years back, do you know Kindling Words? It's a writing and editorial and illustrator retreat. It's on the East Coast. So one of these days we should bring you out for it. But it's the only retreat of its kind that includes editors as well. And it's a lot of fun.
Sorry, just check my phone for a connection for a minute. Okay, I think I'm back. There. Okay, so there's a retreat for editors. We should go. So
this is a weekend retreat. Just, you've probably been to some you teach at several writing retreats, so you know what a writing retreat is. So we had Lori Hall Sanderson and Linda Sue Park in the same weekend.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, audience, if you don't know who these people are, you should be reading their books because they're amazing. Lori Hall Sanderson has been awarded so many times. She's won the Prince. She's won the Astrid Lindgren Award, I think, the Lifetime Achievement Award in children's literature. Linda Sue Park has won the Newbery, along with a huge long list of other stuff. So when we're talking about process, these are people who know their process. And Lori gets up and she goes to give her keynote speech and talks about how important it is to just write the first draft. Don't stop, don't edit, don't collect $200, just write the whole first draft. And then the next morning, Linda Sue Park gets up to teach the writing workshop. And she basically says to Lori, with all due respect, that's not how it works for me. And she goes on to talk about how her process is to read her entire chapter that she wrote the previous day, not to read the whole book, but to read like whatever section she wrote the previous day. And then that gets her into the mindset to then continue. And so we got these multi-award-winning authors who have completely opposite processes, but those processes work for them. So with that in mind, the book really gets into a lot of the structural stuff, like character and plot and all that kind of stuff. But of all those things, I'm wondering, what do you think, how can a writer figure out what their process is so that they can bring all these things together for themselves?
Yeah, it's the question we always ask each other at writing conferences. Like, when do you find time to write? Where do you start? Do you start with a character or a story, or like, how do you put it together? Because every book is different. I think that's important to remember, is that not only as a writer do you have a particular process, but the story you are telling, the book you are writing, may respond better to different kinds of process, and being flexible enough to change is really important. Hourglass Door, I wrote out of order. I wrote the first 3 chapters, the last 3 chapters, and then I just wrote whatever I felt like in between and stitched it all together later. Golden Spiral, I wrote chapter 1, page 1, paragraph 1, word 1, all the way chronologically straight through to the end, because that book did not play well when I tried to write the first 3 chapters and the last 3 chapters and everything in between. I'm like, I don't know what happens in between these things. And so finding my way through that story, I had to do that chronologically. And so I would tell people, don't panic if what worked for you on book number 1 no longer works for book number 2. That doesn't mean your process is broken. That doesn't mean you have a bad story. It just means that you're finding a different path through this labyrinth of the storytelling maze. I think whatever process you do that gets you to the end of the manuscript, where you can get all the way to the writing the end, is the process that works. Personally, I'm a plotter. I like outlines, I like structure, I like charts and graphs, I like lists. So I always start with that. But I have friends who pants their way through it and then later on apply a structure. And that's okay too, because we both end up at the same place with finished manuscript. And we will never entirely be on one complete end of that spectrum. There will be times where you can be a plotter, but you will still have your story take a hard left, and you're like, well, I guess we're going here now. And you may be a pantser who has written yourself into a corner, and the way out of it is to say, well, let me step back and look at it from a larger viewpoint and say, where structurally, what beat am I missing? What pivot point is
what
it here?
Relationship, what
conflict do I need to enhance that will unlock the story for me? And that, I think, comes back to why it's fun and why it's playful, because you get to try a lot of different things. You get to try a lot of different mediums. It's painting with a number of different brushes and a number of different colors to get the result you want.
So I think you might have known back in the day, before you even got into Supernatural, how into Supernatural I was. And then you took it and ran with it and you kind of blew everybody else who was in your friend circle who is into Supernatural completely out of the water.
My favorite show.
It's among my favorite shows, but it's not my favorite the way it's your favorite. And I do believe you wrote a whole book about what you can learn from Supernatural storytelling wise. So I'm wondering, for the people who love a series like that, my example for years and years with my authors was Buffy, because it was a great, I was working at Wizards of the Coast and I was doing all of these long series within series within series. Dragonlance: The New Adventures and Dragon Codex books, you had to know the entire history of Dragonlance to be able to work within this, but also you had to create a little arc. Anyway, so I would love for you to tell us briefly what that experience of really diving into Supernatural taught you about your own writing and editing, and what you think, like, breaking apart some other story can help a writer in their process.
Yeah, Supernatural is my favorite TV show. Like, full stop. I had planned for that to be my favorite TV show. You
really dove in.
I watched 11 seasons in 33 days. I don't know what to tell you. I fell into the season and here I am. But what it taught me, after I had watched it several times and I had this grand idea to write a little blog post about each episode for plot, character, and theme, plus then a writing tip, it really made me look at the story both on an episode level and as a season level and as a series level, to start picking out the threads and saying, oh, I see what you're doing here. I see how you are utilizing repetition, or I see how you're building a scene and sequel. Oh, I see how you've layered a redemption arc over 4 or 5 episodes, because I was looking at it. I loved the story so much that I wanted to see how it worked. And so that's what I did. And so I watched it through one season, one time through looking for notes of foreshadowing. And I watched it through once looking for character nuance and how they were building character arcs. And being able to do that kind of analysis on a story that you love, whether it's Supernatural or something else, you could do the same thing with the Harry Potter series or Lord of the Rings or Buffy or X-Files or Friends or whatever it is. If you sort of take a step back and say, okay, I recognize I'm having an emotional reaction to this episode or to this story. Why is that? What did they do to make me feel this way? And then when you can say, is it something they said or something they did or something that a description, the way it looked on the screen, you can start putting those tools in your toolbox to say, okay, well, then if I want my reader to have the same reaction, then I should mimic that path. I should follow that path. I should use this kind of language. I should utilize that kind of metaphor, because that's a tool that will help get to the emotion of it all. Exactly. And I accidentally wrote 1,200 pages about Supernatural in 6 months. So.
Accidentally, kind of like Brandon Sanderson accidentally writing a middle grade book in the middle. And then in the rest of the book, more like in the middle of the book, you've given us some math equations. We get a whole chapter on voice. And I love that you included a chapter on writing endings, because so often writers, they rewrite and they workshop those first 3 chapters, but they don't do a whole lot of work on the middle and the end. And they forget how important it is to stick the landing. And so what do our listeners need to know about the building blocks of story? How will this book help them to dive deeper?
Well, first of all, I want to say I'm on my phone and I can see my little battery bar going down.
Oh, no.
So if you me, I will try to get back on it just as fast as I can.
Okay.
Speaking of abrupt endings, but while I still have battery, the equation that I sort of built out was, like I said, I like charts and graphs and I like the structure of it. So I have this equation where the story is made of plot and theme. And plot requires a character with a goal whose motivation is greater than adversity, who has a relationship that is under stress that will provide the conflict, and then you put that character through try-fail cycles. And so I sort of, built it all out with my brackets and my parentheses to sort of make it look like a math equation. But it also helped me break it down into individual steps. Okay, what do I need to know about a character? What do I need to know about a goal? What do I need to know about motivation? And that helped me step back and say, all right, I don't have to know everything about everything all at once. I just need to understand a little bit more about this one part of the equation. And then when I've mastered that, or at least feel a little bit more confident in it, I can work on the next part and see how they relate, see how they're connected, see how they play off against each other. And if I feel really, really strong on character, great, that part can be done, and I can move on to another part that maybe needs a little help. And then that way, again, we've broken it down into digestible, achievable.
You don't have to do everything at once.
Do not have to do everything at once. And writing your first draft may just be building character. And then you go back through on a second pass and layer in a little bit more of the conflict, or you go in and make sure everybody's motivation makes sense. And you go back through and say, okay, how do I put more stress on this relationship? And you can go back through and say, okay, how do I put in the symbolism to build a theme? And then by the end, your book is beautiful and strong and thriving. And we don't have to know, the reader doesn't have to know that you went through it time and time again, because the end result is beautiful.
Yep. Quick question from Joan in the comments. She's wondering how we get the book that you wrote about Supernatural. What's the title? Is it available in print anymore?
No, I did a short run in print, but I just have it as an ebook that I sell directly. I don't have it on Amazon or anything yet. So email me or contact Stacy and she can hook us up. I called it writing, hunting themes, writing stories, saving stories, hunting themes, the writing business, which is a play on saving people, hunting.
I have a t-shirt.
Which is from Supernatural. And so if you're interested in that book, I sell the ebook that has all 327 episodes and all of the comments and all of the analysis. It's designed so that you can watch the show, watch the episode, then read the little section, and then watch the next episode and read the next section. So
perfect.
It was
Thanks.
definitely a labor of love.
And so you've also got a chapter on writer's block, and I think that is a really great topic for getting beyond the fear of the blank page.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of ways that a writer might be blocked, and I think I think the main thing that we ought to get out of this today is your point on playing, allowing yourself to play. But anything else that you might advise as far as writer's block goes?
Yeah, I think I always try to reframe it, and I say this in the book, but I try to reframe it as saying it's not a block so much as it's an opportunity for me to creatively solve a problem. Because that's really what it is. There's some problem that's happening in your story that is causing it to stall or to stop, and you don't know how to get through it. But you are a creative person and you have the ability to solve problems. And so that puts the power back in your hands to say, I can fix this. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to fix it. And the different ways you fix it can be part of that play. One of the things that I really like to do when I'm stuck like that is I will change up the place that I write, even if it's just moving to a different room in my house, or I will change up how I write. If I've been on the computer for a really long time, I will try to write the next part by hand.
I think that's a really important one for people who work on the computer a lot. Like,
yeah,
even like I read for a living. I read on the computer most of the time. I'll develop mental edit, and we're going to talk about editing in a moment, on paper, so that the line edit feels like a different part of the process. But when I'm reading, it's all audiobooks because I need to switch it up as far as that goes, or I'm just going to be fatigued. And I think what you're saying about the writing process is very similar. Change up your process so that it feels refreshing to you.
Yeah. Even sometimes as simple as changing the font on your screen can do something to your brain to say, oh, this looks different. I'm interacting with it different. Oh my gosh, suddenly I see something I hadn't seen before. And that's a fast change. And if you don't like it, you can always change it back. but anything that can kind of break up how you see, how you hear, how you actually write it with a keyboard or with pen and paper can be a way to get around that writer's block. Some of the other ways, of course, are then digging into maybe there's a problem with your character development. Maybe there's a motivation that is unexplained. Something that's bigger or more concrete that you can dig into and say, oh, yeah, that doesn't work. I have a huge plot hole here. Let's fix that, or let's take that, let's move it over here, and actually change up the structure of your story.
And I think that Jessica has a really great question as we move to the revision part of the discussion, because her question is, at what point in going through your book to improve do you decide that it's done? I've edited books to death by trying for perfection. And I think that your whole book is kind of about getting past that fear of perfection. So let's talk about revision. And also, how do the writers that you know approach the process of editing yourself in the first place?
Yeah, so revision, I think, is actually where a lot of the actual writing comes into play. First draft is running around the playground without any rules, on the swings, on the slides, it's all fun. And then revision is, now you're at like the Olympics and there are rules and there are judges and you're trying to get everything just so. But the important thing to remember is that you will never be done and it will never be perfect. So don't hold out hope for that. I published Hourglass Door and I loved it and it was amazing. And I opened it up and I realized that there was a mistake on the first page. I had used the wrong word on the first page of my book. And I was like, oh, okay.
But I can tell you as an editor, and I'm sure you can as well, that we also are kind of like, I want more time with this. Like, we're constantly striving for perfection on the editing side as well. And yeah, so go ahead.
My advice is when I think about, I had that question of how do I know when I'm done? How do I know when I can move on? You have to let go of this idea that it will somehow be perfect before you send it out, because there will always be problems there will always be mistakes in it. And it's just a degree of embarrassing mistakes or technical mistakes. And for me, if you are still building the house, if you're still building a room for a character or a second level of your plot or doing the landscaping of your setting, you are still in that process of revising. But if you're just rearranging the furniture, if you're hanging up blue curtains instead of green curtains, if you're fussing with commas, if you're just debating the merits of brown over chocolate, then you're done. You're done, friend. Send it out. Do the thing. Because you could spend your whole life just fussing with those small things. And the point is not to do that. The point is to write it and get it out and let other people read it and see it and experience it.
I also always recommend giving yourself space before you revise. If you've just finished your first draft, you've got to let yourself have space to have new eyes on it. The whole point of an editor is to have a separate pair of eyes on your manuscript, like that can give you good feedback as the first reader. And the same goes for editing yourself, that if you're going into it immediately, I mean, it can be, oh, I meant to do that thing, I'm going to go back and fix that thing. That's great. But when you're talking about something as big as a full-length novel, you have to have a little bit of space between it before you dive into it with the revision goggles on.
And that's because your brain will very helpfully
Fill in
fix the things that are wrong with it. Your brain will say, oh, I will put in the missing word here. Oh, I know what you meant to spell here. Oh, yeah, I remember what I was thinking about, even though it's not on the page. And so you have to get that hot mess poured out of your brain, and you have to let it cool so that when your brain comes back to it, it's looking at it with fresh eyes. It's looking at it with a more critical eye to say, well, there's a word missing here. And I don't understand what that means. That this is misspelled.
Who is that person who came out of nowhere?
Who is this person again? And why did they disappear in chapter 7? I don't know. And so you're doing yourself a favor, and you're doing your brain a favor by setting it down, putting it in a drawer, closing the file, whatever it is, and giving yourself that space to rest, think about something else, consume other things, binge your favorite show, binge Supernatural, and then come back to it and be like, oh, now I can approach this and work with this in a much more technical, analytical fashion. And then you find those things.
Yeah. And I think it's important that you point out in the book that being a writer and being an editor, whether you're talking about, an editor like you and me working at a publishing house or editing your own book, those are two different jobs. They're two different creative processes.
Yeah, editing is still very much a creative process because I have to not only make sure what's on the page is correct and accurate and doing its job, but I also have to say what's not here that could be better. How can I help the author find their voice and strengthen their voice? How can I make sure that the reader experience will be seamless? And so at some point, and doing all of that without inserting myself as the editor into the process, because that's not my job. The author's name is on the book. It's the author's job, and I want the author to get all of the glory. And so I'm responsible to help say, well, maybe we could fix this here. Could you consider revising or rephrasing this? Did you realize that this is how this is coming across? Is that what you meant? And that it's a very different process than writing. But
exactly.
Equally.
Which brings us to the get published part of your title.
Yeah.
And you go a little bit into how the editing process works after you get acquired by a publishing house. Can you give us a quick summary of what that editing process looks like?
Yeah, it'll be different at every editing house, and with every editor you work with, your mileage may vary across the path. But generally, what happens is after you finish your manuscript, for most publishing houses, you will need to work with an agent. And so the process of finding an agent means that you write a query letter, which is 1 page. It tells me everything I need to know about the book, which is daunting but doable. And then you send that out, and when you find an agent who wants to represent you, then the agent will submit your book to an editor at a publishing house. And you can sort of go through that whole process again. And then once an editor has acquired your book at a publishing house, then you'll get through, there's a number of approvals that have to happen within the company itself, based on content, based on financials, based on what other books we have on the schedule, marketing, publicity, availability, things like that have nothing to do, almost nothing to do with you or your book, but are all the business parts of it that you can't control. And then once all of those hoops have been jumped through and the editor now has your book and you're working together as a partnership, then you'll do developmental edits, which could have several rounds. And that's where the editor will say, chapter 14 doesn't work. This character arc needs to be strengthened. It's all the big picture stuff. You'll do several of those rounds, and then you'll go into line editing, where you will look at every single sentence and every single word and decide, does it need to be tightened? Is this the best thing? And we'll do those rounds as well. And then the third layer is copy editing, which is the nuts and bolts, commas, punctuation, spelling,
Typos.
making sure the typos, all of those things get cleared up, because editing is always that top-down process. You go from the very, very big to the very, very small.
And at most houses, that copy editor is an entirely different person because the editor's been staring at that manuscript for so long.
Yeah, because the editor and the author, again, at that point, you're like, I hate this book. I don't know why we acquired this book. No one's ever going to read this book because we've been looking at it for months and diving in deep, and it's all you think about and it's all you see. And so handing it off then to another person to do copy edits or to do a proofreading or to do another pass on it can also give you those fresh eyes to find the mistakes that have managed to make it through, which is why I tell people, don't worry that your manuscript isn't perfect or done when you submit it, because there are going to be layers and layers and layers
Yep.
of people upon people upon people to help you get it in better shape than when you submitted it.
Try and avoid the worst of your typos and stuff like that, because obviously you want it to look professional when
Yes.
you're submitting it. But if you don't know how to use an M dash, we'll fix it.
That's a fixable mistake. Making sure you run your spell check. There are plenty of editing review software programs like Perfected or even Microsoft Word's editor that even just a quick pass of those are going to catch the most egregious of errors. And then you can feel confident sending it out and be like, okay, maybe not 100% of my commas are in the right place, but I don't know, 75% of them are close to the
Yeah,
right place.
exactly.
That's fine. That's fine.
So Valerie asks, how long does the editing process take from manuscript request to publish date? And that, I think, is a trick question.
That is a trick question because it depends so much. Some books are more obedient than others. I've done some books that only take a couple of passes and they're good to go. I've had some books that we've gone back and forth on months, and then I still have to cut 5,000 words out of it, and it can take quite a bit of time. For Shadow Mountain, I can give you sort of a general. Once we acquire a manuscript, once we say yes, we want to publish it, we try to have a good solid 4 to 5 months where we are working on the editorial part of it, and we want to have the book. Excuse me. We want to have a finished manuscript roughly before the release date of when we want it. So if we want a Christmas book,
You broke up a little bit. You broke up a little bit there. Can you repeat yourself for that just last little bit?
So we want the manuscript in at least a year.
I think we're losing
So
you, Lisa.
You say, oh,
Yep, we've lost you. She's going to try and get back on.
I'm going to try to get back on real quick, but not on my computer. Let's see if I can get back on. Hang on.
I think you're back. So keep talking while you're, keep talking while you're working on that, because I think we've got you for a little while.
Okay. So I want things in at least a year before its release date. So if we want something to come out in July, I want the manuscript at the very latest in the July before. Now, submission and acquisitions could take up to a year at times to do that as well.
Well, and when you're talking about a New York house, a year before pub is when they're doing ARCs, because they have to get everything out to, and for those who don't know, ARCs is the advanced reading copy that goes out to reviewers and promotional. And so we're at Lee and Low trying to get on that schedule so that we can send our books out to like whatever the most anticipated books of the year kind of thing. And so we're trying to get copy edited final copy to the design and typesetting team by a year before pubs so that we can have all of that done. So we're looking at a 3-year process at this point for some books.
Yeah. It's the other reason why when you're making a goal, there's a goal to write, there's a goal to edit, and there's a goal to get published. And those might take years for each step. They might not, but be prepared that the books we're saying yes to right now, we're scheduling for late 2026, 27, like we talked about at the beginning of the conversation. That's just how the business goes.
Exactly. We're actually nearly out of time, so I think we've made it with your phone. You mentioned a surprise for people who registered ahead of time.
Yes. So if you registered ahead of time, if you're here on the call, and I'm going to let Stacy figure out how to pick a winner, but of everybody who's registered, you have now been entered, and somebody's going to win, and I will edit either your query letter if you're ready to submit, or I will review the first 5 pages of your manuscript and give you feedback, sort of developmental feedback on the first 5 pages of your manuscript. And so I wanted to give back a little to say thank you for coming to the podcast and for asking good questions and for being great writers.
That is amazing. So I have all the emails of people who registered on the Eventbrite, and we can contact people on Facebook if they registered on Facebook as well. So we'll just do a random number drawing, and we'll let you know in the next week or so who won. Let me see if there are any more questions before we wrap up. You guys have had some really great discussion on the live stream, by the way. Thank you. One thing that I'm going to note as far as this live stream goes, I'm going to go ahead and leave this up because we've got some really great comments on the live stream that I think can be useful for each of you. But the connection has been really bad tonight as far as video goes, and it actually records locally for both of us. So I think we might have better video on Lisa's end when it uploads. So I'm also going to upload a slightly edited, I don't actually edit like the ums and ahs or anything, but I'm going to upload an edited version of it with, fingers crossed, better video. So just FYI, this is being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel. And I am working on the audio portion of the podcast because this is supposed to be a podcast, but I haven't gotten that far yet because, as I said, 2 jobs, etc. So it's still in process, but I will be letting people know on social media and our email list, etc., when that is available as well. But I'm looking at the comments and seeing if there's any more questions. And if you have any questions, now's the time, because there's also a little bit of a delay in coming from the YouTube comments over to the comments, because we've only got a few minutes left. So go ahead and ask your questions if you haven't yet. Whitney says, and once you tell yourself perfection doesn't exist, then you edit trying to get it as close to perfect that does exist. I like that. I like that. I think we've caught most of the questions. Lisa, do you have a website that you want to have people direct people to?
Not yet. I built one, but people can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram at author Lisa Mangum, and on TikTok. I am now a TikToker, as the kids say. Kids don't say that.
For however long that lasts, we'll see.
So I'm at author Lisa Mangum on those sites. I'm also still on X at Lisa Mangum. So you can grab me on the socials anywhere, and I'm happy to engage and answer questions or give advice. Talk about books. It's my favorite thing.
Perfect.
That's supernatural.
And the book is Write Fearless, Edit Smart, Get Published. And you can order it at curiouscatbookshop.com, or really anywhere books are sold. But I'm asking you, please order it from Curious Cat Bookshop if you haven't gotten it yet. And I think that's it. Oh, and CuriousCatBookshop.com, you can also follow us from there to all of our socials as well. We're on pretty much everywhere at this point, except for Twitter. And I'm going to call it Twitter till the day it finally dies.
It will always be Twitter.
Exactly. But thank you so much to everybody who joined us. We had a nice crew tonight. It was really great. And we really appreciate you coming here. And thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us.
Thank you. It was delightful.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.